What's up, everybody? I've had a random project come up today. This is one of those Pinterest specials for my wife. She asked me to tackle this little job. This is something I've done before this past summer. I had an idea that I wanted to do something with these little seashells I'd collected, and so I made this pendant. And the way I did this was I bought this bezel from Hobby Lobby. They're about, I think, $3 a pair, something like that for a pair of them. And it's about a 1-inch diameter bezel. They come in copper and bronze or brass, whatever that is. And what I did was I put some ice resin, this stuff, also from Hobby Lobby. It's $30, but I used a coupon. So it was around $16, which you could do, you know, a lot of stuff with that resin. But anyway, so I put a little bit of resin in the bottom, sprinkled some sand in there from the same beach that I collected the shell from, and then I used this little piece of, it's like a green flower. They sell it at Hobby Lobby. They come in an arrangement of colors. Matter of fact, I have some other ones. It's like baby's breath looking, but it's just a little dyed flower, and I use the green in this one. And then I pour the ice resin over the top and try to get a nice little dome. And this one took 2 coats to complete because the flower kept floating up and touching the surface, and it would create just this little raised spot. But you can just recoat multiple times and it dries just as clear as the first coat. So anyway, with this idea in mind, I decided to well, I didn't decide, my wife decided. She wanted me to make some pendants with maps, and asked me to put them inside of pendants. So the way I'm going to do that, which has probably been done 10,000 times on YouTube, I have no idea. But the way I'm going to do it, let's pretend this is the map picture that you like. Anything made of paper. It's a 1-inch bezel, so I'm using a 15/16 circle, so it's just within the 1-inch bezel. You could probably cut it right at 1 inch, but if it's irregular at all and not perfect, you'll have issues getting it to set inside. So 15/16 is close enough for me. And I just take my sharp X-Acto knife, not a dull one. Even a brand new blade, you'll want to strop it just to get it as sharp as you can so it cuts really nice and clean. And I stropped this one multiple times between cuts, and it worked out pretty nice. That moved on me a little bit, but anyway, there's a million ways to cut a circle, but this is pretty clean. And this is on a cutting mat, so I'm not worried about the table. And there's your 15/16 circle. And all I do, this is some Mod Podge. This is the same Mod Podge I used earlier today before I decided to make a video about this. And I just brushed a coat. I'll go ahead and do this one. Just a thin coat of Mod Podge on the face. This is starting to set up a little bit already. But just like if you're painting your nails or something, if it's too thick, it's going to have runs and spots that won't dry evenly. But if you just do a nice thin coat and just brush it to death to where every brush stroke's gone, it'll just be kind of a shiny and glazed. Also, it sticks to your finger since it's so small. I was using a toothpick to hold it down. I don't have that toothpick over here, so I'm not going to bother. But anyway, you can use a toothpick to hold it down and it won't stick to you. Or this little knife would work too. Do it like that. Let this dry for like 10 minutes. It's really quick if you do a thin coat, and then it'll be dry to the touch. And I would say at least 2 coats on the front and at least 1 coat on the back. Multiple coats is probably better, but I'm not sure how it would affect visibility depending on the level of detail in your picture. So anyway, the point of this is to waterproof it, so when you apply the ice resin to it, it doesn't penetrate the paper and soak the paper and ruin it. There's probably multiple ways to waterproof them, maybe nail polish or something like that, I don't know. But I know this Mod Podge technique works, and that's what I'm going to do. So I do these in batches. I'm going to do like a dozen today just because it takes so much time, and it doesn't really multiply that much time when you're doing, you know, 5 or 6 or 10. So if you plan out a bunch of them, you mix the resin one time, which is the most expensive part of the whole deal, and you can just pour them all at once and let them all set up. It takes multiple days, multiple hours for everything to set up and cure. And while you're waiting, it's nice to have, you know, a dozen of these things done when you're done, rather than just, you know, all that time spent for 1 or 2 pendants. So just like this beach scene, you know, you can set up a little scene inside the bezel with just found things, paper, small objects. You know, there's just a billion things you could come up with that would work for this, and it's really fun to do, and it's a really cool way to use something that you might have scrapbooked and turn into a wearable piece of jewelry. So that's what I'm going to do. So from this point forward in the video, these steps are done, and then I'm just going to show you where I kind of jumped into the project that I was working on today, and we'll see how it goes from here. So this is just a piece of wood. I put some packing tape over it at some point in time for a previous project, but I'll just leave that on there. It'll keep the resin and stuff from sticking to the piece of wood. Shouldn't be really an issue, but it's already there, so I'll just stick with it. This is just some sticky tack. I found that if you're doing several of these, I don't want to bump them and have them fall over. I also want to be able to pick this board up and transplant it to like inside of a cabinet or something along those lines. So I've gotten in the habit of using something to hold these guys good and flat, because the bezel loop doesn't allow it to sit flat on the table. So you can either raise it up or let it hang over the edge. If you're doing just like one, it wouldn't be a big issue. But this epoxy takes so long to dry that I like to keep it inside of a cabinet so I don't get dust and stuff settling in it. So I'll just put it on there nice and secure, and then don't worry about it. And I believe these are 1-inch bezels, and I cut my little circles out at around 15/16. So theoretically it should just drop down inside, which it does. So you could probably cut them right at 1 inch, but I didn't want to deal with them being too tight. So the plan is to go ahead and get these all secured. I want to put just a drop of glue inside the bezel and glue the paper down inside there, just so when I'm applying the epoxy, the paper doesn't float in the epoxy, and I don't want that to be an issue. And it might not be an issue. You might be able to just lay them down in there and the epoxy lays on top and it holds them down, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to be the case. So I'm just going to glue it down a little, and then I don't have to worry about this at all. So I'll go ahead and get these tacked down. Alright, so I'm just going to use some just regular Elmer's glue, and I'm just going to do a thin coat on the back of the paper and spread it around as evenly as I can and stick it down in the pendant. And we'll see how this goes. I was afraid of using any other kind of glue because I didn't want it to react with the metal, and I didn't want it to eat through the Mod Podge. And I'm pretty sure Mod Podge, I don't know exactly what it's made of, but it sure smells a lot like Elmer's glue. So I feel like that has to be an ingredient of some kind. So we'll do just a little. And then we'll try to get it lined up in there. And that seems to be sitting pretty flat in there. It would be nice if I had something I could just lay down inside there and fit it. Hey, look at that. I happen to have a little pin sitting right next to us. I have a feeling that the dome effect that the resin's going to create will kind of offset any kind of weirdness around the edges. So as long as it's flat in the middle, I bet it's going to look just fine. So there's one. And I decided to do just a batch of these just because if you know, when you're doing things that involve a lot of gluing and drying time, you might as well do a few at a time, because it doesn't take that much more effort to do multiples. So I just went ahead and cut out like any relevant city in the map, just for fun. But you get the general idea. I'm just gonna put a little bit of glue on the back of these and spread it out nice and evenly and thin, and then set it down inside and make sure they're good and flat. And I'll go ahead and do the rest. Okay, so I'm doing the last one, and one thing I've noticed is that you want to do a fairly heavy coat and take it all the way to the edges, because the edges will curl if you don't go all the way. So, and I've been keeping this little paper towel handy to dry my fingertips off, just enough to not get glue on everything. And then gently pat it down, center it, and if you can find something that fits inside, man, that makes it super easy. And that's pretty much it. So I've got all of these ready. I kept this side blank so I can pick it up and carry it around a little bit easier. And at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and mix up my ice resin and start dripping it on there. These will probably only take one mix of resin to complete them. I have made some pendants with seashells and different things, and you'll end up having to use multiple coats. If something just touches the surface, if you can't quite get it to bubble and cover it entirely, you can put multiple coats on. You don't even have to do anything in between coats. Just wait till it cures. Maybe wait, you know, a week if you want to be super conservative, or just whenever it's dry to the touch, you can coat over it. And if you ever mix, it's supposed to be 50-50 mix on the ice resin, but if it ever doesn't quite cure, just give it an extra day or two. And if that doesn't do it, apparently you can use clear coat and just spray it with clear coat, and that will dry and seal it and eliminate the tackiness. So anyway, I'll go ahead and get my resin out and start pouring it on these guys. I think I'm going to go ahead and use an ounce. So I'll do a 1/2 ounce of part A and a 1/2 ounce of part B and mix that together and see where that puts it. I feel like an ounce is going to be plenty to do all these. So I think that's what I'll do. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and mix these two together, start stirring, and then start pouring. Alright, so I put in a 1/2 ounce of my my resin in my hardener, and got a total of 1 ounce mixed. This feels like a lot, but we'll see what it ends up actually being like. There's a lot of bubbles in it right now, but I've made about 3 or 4 pendants in a similar way, and the bubbles, it has such a long curing time that the bubbles seem to have plenty of time to raise and not be an issue. I think you can use like a heat gun or a hair dryer and add a little heat to the surface of the resin, and it'll cause the bubbles to raise, but I haven't had to resort to that, and I'm not going for absolute perfection anyway. If I had a couple small bubbles, won't kill me, so I'm not too worried about it. But if you don't feel like reading the instructions and you would just want me to tell you what to do, it says to mix at least 1 ounce of each, or 1 ounce of, it says a minimum of 1 ounce each, yeah. Which I've done small amounts. Now I'm doing 1/2 ounce each, and it is probably a little bit more risky that you're going to have something that takes longer to dry out, but it can be done. So the 1 ounce measurement's probably not a bad idea. I feel like this is a really good amount to go with, but always stick to the directions. Don't listen to me. Just read the bottle and follow it. It says to mix it well for 2 minutes and let it set for 5 minutes, and then apply it, but don't put it in an airtight container to dry. I put mine in a little cabinet that I don't plan on using for a couple days, and it gives it plenty of time to settle without worrying about dust getting into it, which is my main concern. And if you can keep the dust out of it and give it plenty of time to cure, it leaves a really nice finish just right out of the bottle. So I'm trying to minimize any chances of ruining that. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and give it the 5-minute rest time that it says it needs, and then I'll start dripping a little bit of resin into each one of these bezels and trying to get a nice dome. So we'll go ahead and let this rest and then get right into it. All right, it's been about 5 minutes. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start getting into this. You want to go slow. I think I have 30 minutes of working time. So I'll just start dripping in the middle and let it build up and run to the edges. And just go slow and don't be in a big rush. 30 minutes is a pretty good amount of time when you start applying an epoxy or resin. That's a good amount of work time. And what I might do is just put some in the center of each pendant and then let it work its way out to the edges. That might be a little bit too aggressive right there. On its own, because it's gonna level out on its own. So less is probably more, and this is gonna be way too much resin, I think. But I tried not to waste it. I prepared 10 of these guys, so I feel like that's a good number. But maybe next time I'll mix a little bit less. But I really didn't want to run out and have to mix it twice. I feel like I would have ended up with waste that way too, so it's kind of hard to avoid some degree of waste. The one drawback of the sticky tacky is it does just give it one point in the middle to hold it level, but if you spread it out kind of flat, it might be a better way to go. Or just let it overhang if you don't want to use the tacky. That would work too. I was just afraid that shuffling around so many of them at once, if I didn't do something to hold them still, I'd lose one. Now this one, I didn't get very much glue on the edges, so it's kind of more cupped. But I think if I just give it some time, it'll work its way out and flatten out. You want it to dome just a little bit because it really looks nice if you can manage to pull that off. And like I said, I've had some seashells and different things I've done, some stones, and that second coat, once you get it on there and it manages to make a nice dome, it just really is a fun effect. It's crazy how much of a dome that you can make. It really will come out. This does mix thinner than epoxy. Epoxy, you can kind of watch it drip down, almost like a honey, whereas this is a little bit more like, it's just a little bit more watered down. I don't know what you could compare it to, but it definitely runs instead of just hanging like honey does. And we're getting there. So far, no big mistakes or anything. And finally getting to the point where I can start looking at trying to get a dome shape. I can still see a little space between the around the edges of some of these, so I'm just going to keep just giving it a drop or two at a time and letting it try to go over the edges on its own. This one's a little crooked. It's causing the resin to settle on one side. I think I'll just drop a little over on that side and help it out. I think I could use a little bit better lighting because it's hard to tell the edge from the epoxy, especially like on that one right there. I can tell there's a little gap to be filled, but it's kind of hard to see. I think I got it. Now some of these you can kind of see it not doming quite right, so it'll be hard to pick up on camera, but you can definitely tell in person. So at your workbench you should be able to see that what's getting where it needs to be and what's not. There we go. That one's pretty flat. I think I'll leave that one, even though it's a little flatter. That one needs some more. Just some variation would be kind of cool, I guess. I don't think I've done one that turned out super flat, but that one might. The picture settled down really nicely in the bottom, so that one just leveled out. One thing I'll do is, if I'm going to do a lot of epoxy, I'll grab like an old piece of wood that I might use like on a knife handle or something, and I'll keep it handy. And if it's got like bug holes in it, which a lot of my wood that I've collected over the years does, because I like wood with character in it. If I'm going to make a handle for something and I want it to be interesting, bug holes are always kind of cool. But I'll fill them with epoxy, so I'll take any extra I have and work it down into the bug holes. So if you do much woodworking at all, you get some old punky, I think is what they call it, punky wood, you can just fill all the bug holes up. I have a lot of Osage orange that a friend of mine gave me, but it had just been infested with some kind of a burrowing insect of some kind. But I've slowly just filled all the holes in it, and it's pretty stuff, and it's durable as it can be. But there's just little tunnels going through it, so it won't be good for just every project out there, but I'll use it for something. And I think this is going to be it. That one domed out pretty well. It's still not wanting to touch the edges because of the way the paper's curled up, so I'm going to have to kind of work that around. But I bet it'll work out. Yeah, there it goes. So by the way, I don't do much Mod Podge work. As a matter of fact, this is my first Mod Podging I've ever done, but I can already see how you could make so many cool things, like out of like newspaper clippings, or you know, this old road map's pretty fun. But you know, if you have like an old newspaper clipping or an old picture, you know, maybe not one that's super rare that you only have one copy of, but you know, if you make a copy of like a picture that you want to have in a pendant, I think it's a really cool way to wear something that's meaningful to you, and something I plan to do a lot of. But anyway, I'm going to let these set. I'm going to give them a minute, and then I'm going to put them in a cabinet that's not airtight and let them set for a few days, and hopefully they'll clear out and look nice. The bubbles already rising to the center, and most of them will dissipate, and it should look perfectly fine when they're done. So anyway, appreciate you guys watching as always. We'll see how these go from here. Alright, so it's the next day, and this is how the pendants turned out. A couple of them, like this guy right here, is a little bit bubbly, but not bad. And I might try maybe applying heat or something to the next go around, but I'll have to look into that. I haven't actually done that myself, but otherwise generally they look good. Some of them are clearer than others, and it seems like the less of a dome and the less resin I used, the flatter and clearer it looks. So maybe there's something to that, but anyway, generally speaking, they turned out pretty good. And it's been 24 hours. You can touch these. They're a little bit tacky, some more than others, and I'm just not going to mess with them for another day before I would hang them on a chain or anything like that. So, but I knew that going in, I was going to give them at least 2 days just to cure completely. But overall, that's the whole deal there. The Mod Podge seems to have held up. You can see a little bit of bleed on the edges of a couple of these. Maybe that didn't do as good as the others, but that one I got a pretty good coat on. But they're not perfect, but you know, it's my first go with them, so I think for a first go they're plenty good. But anyway, just wanted to share, and thank you guys for watching.